Hi, my name is Robin Wong. In this video, I want to talk about the relevance of using a full frame camera. If you are a micro four thirds shooter, do you really need a full frame camera? Let's do this. Before we dive in too deep, let me clarify that this is not about full frame versus micro four thirds. It is not a comparison. There's no point arguing which one is better. That discussion is not going to go anywhere. It's going to cause a lot of bloodshed, and I find it totally meaningless. I do, however, want to share my experience using micro four thirds as a professional photographer, and I have been using micro four thirds system for many years, shooting commercial jobs as well as for my personal projects. I want to share how I find the system or the format to be sufficient for what I want to do, and maybe it is sufficient for what you want to do as well. Let's get the obvious truth out of the way. Physics is physics, there's no going around it. Full frame cameras having much larger image sensor will definitely perform better in low light shooting environment. Shooting with high ISOs, full frame cameras will definitely produce cleaner images in comparison to micro four thirds cameras. Full frame cameras also has better dynamic range. Shooting in extremely harsh condition, full frame cameras can better recover details in the extreme highlight and extreme shadow region better than micro four thirds cameras. Also, full frame cameras can render shallower depth of field, meaning that the camera can blur the background much better. Many years ago, when I was still the product specialist for Olympus Malaysia, we did a shootout challenge between full frame camera users versus the Olympus OMD EM1. This particular shootout challenge was created specifically for Kuala Lumpur Photography Festival. We did two sessions, one in 2013 and one in 2014. In this shootout challenge, we invited a full frame camera user to come into our booth, shoot side by side with an EM1 camera, another photographer using the EM1. Same camera settings, and we were shooting a model. This is to simulate a professional shooting environment. It is a studio shoot, and we had professional lights set up as well. I remember we were using pro photo lighting. Everything was made equal, same shutter speed, same aperture, same ISO, same lighting setup, same pose for the model, and the images were taken live in front of the crowd. The images are then sent to a professional printer. The professional printer were making the print live in front of everyone. No post-processing was done. Everything was transparent and truthful, and when the images came out from the printer, it was displayed side by side. We didn't tell anyone else which image was taken with which camera, and the only person who knew the answer was the printer. Guess what? We asked the crowd to guess which image was taken with which camera. Was it full frame? Which one was taken with the EM1? 50% of the crowd guessed it wrong. Half of the crowd could not tell which image was actually full frame and which image was actually the EM1. The crowd consists of professional photographers, photography enthusiasts, and also non-photographers. Even the professional photographers, some renowned photographers in Malaysia, they couldn't tell apart which image was taken with the EM1. I'm not here to tell you that, oh, you know, the Olympus EM1 is as good as full frame. No, that is not the point of that shootout challenge. The shootout challenge is not trying to prove or to convince the crowd that Olympus EM1 is as good as a full frame camera. That is not the objective. What we wanted to tell the crowd was that the Olympus OMD EM1 or the micro four thirds system was definitely sufficient for professional photography work, and I myself as a professional photographer truly believed in that. Here are my reasons why I'm not using a full frame camera and why I think the micro four thirds is more than sufficient for the photography that I do. Bear in mind that these are subjective opinion. These are my reasons. They may be applicable for you. They may not be relevant for you as well. So please don't take this as the absolute truth. Hey, it is my opinion and I can be wrong as well. Feel free to disagree with me. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you think that there are some things that I say are wrong, I would love to hear from you as well. The reason number one, point of sufficiency. I personally think that within the restrictions or limitations of Micro Four Thirds, what the camera format or the system format can do for me is definitely sufficient. Yes, the full frame camera has more dynamic range, and full frame camera can render shallow depth of field, and the full frame camera can perform better in low light shooting, going super ridiculous high ISO numbers. But when I'm using Micro Four Thirds camera, I seldom find myself, actually I can tell you that I never found myself in a situation where the dynamic range was not enough, or the high ISO gives me a lot of problem in low light, or I couldn't render shallow depth of field. If we look at specifically dynamic range, I've made a video before. I've talked about how the Olympus EM5 Mark III, or was it EM1 Mark II? I think it was the EM1 Mark II. I will leave the video up here if you haven't seen that video. I've proven that for my shooting, again, I'm very specific, for my needs and my shooting, there is ample of dynamic range that the Olympus EM1 Mark II and the EM5 Mark III can provide me to work with. I can recover 2 stops details in the shadow region, I can recover 2 stops details in the highlight region. That is a lot to work with. I haven't found a situation where the dynamic range of the image sensor was not enough. And I practice strict shooting discipline, meaning that I expose my images as close to the result that I intended. I do very minimal post-processing, and when I recover the details and the highlights, it is usually more than sufficient. And when it comes to extreme low light shooting, in combination with the 5-axis image stabilization, I find that the Olympus OMD system provides more than sufficient low light shooting capability. I can ramp up the ISO to 3200 or 6400 with no issue. I've shot the Milky Way, I've shot portraits with ISO 12800, I've consistently been shooting theater or stage where I need ISO 1600 or 3200 or even beyond to freeze motion because everyone is moving about on stage. There's mini live concerts that I've been shooting, the singer is constantly dancing or moving. In theater, there's dances, and my clients never complain about high ISO noise, or they never told me, hey Robin, you should be using a full frame camera. Never once happened. They were always happy with the images. If they were not happy with the images, why would they continue to hire me and come back to me to shoot their future events? Also, in the subject of shallow depth of field, I never once wished that I have blurrier background. I was working with the Olympus 45 1.8 and 75 1.8, and currently I have the Olympus 25 1.2. With these lenses, I was able to render very blur background. It was definitely sufficient to isolate the subject from the background. It's definitely for me to create that blurry look in the background if I want to. This is especially important if you're shooting portraits or doing weddings or events where sometimes the background may not work in your favor and you don't have time to recompose your shot. The best way is just to blur off the background so that your main subject pops and it is not too distracting. I found the Olympus 45 1.8 to work wonders. I've been shooting with the 40 to 150 f2.8 Pro as well. These lenses are capable of creating blur background, and I generally found that the shallow depth of field rendering capability of Micro Four Thirds is definitely enough for what I wanted to accomplish. My reason number 2 of using the Micro Four Thirds system versus the full frame is the lenses. Yes, lenses. I have to be very, very clear here. Not all lenses are created equal. The Olympus 12 to 40 f2.8 is not equivalent to, say, a Tamron 24 to 70 f2.8. And Olympus 45 1.8 is not necessarily equal to any other competitor's full frame 85 f1.8. I am not talking about the equivalence when it comes to shallow depth of field rendering. No, I'm talking about the optical quality, the ability of the lens to render a very sharp and highly detailed with good contrast image. I'm talking about the ability of the lens to control the technical lens flaw, and talking about the ability of the lens to give you that fantastic result, because to me, lenses are more important than the camera. If I were to say one thing that makes Micro Four Thirds special, it is not about the smaller size, it's not about the portability of the system, but it is about the lens quality. Olympus as well as Panasonic have consistently producing many amazing, incredibly sharp, compact lenses. If you have seen what these lenses can do, the kind of result that you can get from these lenses, you will know that there's something truly special about Micro Four Thirds. It is easier to optimize the lens optical design when the lens is much smaller and the lens doesn't need to be too large to cover a large image sensor. Now, this last reason may sound a little bit strange, but do bear with me. It has something to do with depth of field. The depth of field advantage on the full frame is also a disadvantage as well. I was testing the Canon 5D Mark I full frame classic camera. I know, I hear some people say that, Robin, it's an old camera, it's a dinosaur camera. It's not a fair comparison to any of the newer cameras. I agree, but I'm not talking about high ISO performance. I'm not talking about high dynamic range. I'm not talking about megapixels. I'm talking specifically on depth of field, and this is still valid. I have written about the 5D classic camera, the 5D Mark I Canon. Yes, I've tested other cameras than Olympus before. I've tested many cameras from other brands before. I've posted it on my blog, and this particular article on the Canon 5D Mark I was posted on Ming Tian's site. I'll leave a link to that article on Ming Tian's blog in the description below to check it out if you're interested. Coming back to the Canon 5D Mark I was shooting in a French fine dining restaurant. The light was really dim in the restaurant and I had to work with high ISO. I was using the Canon 40 f2.8 pancake. Wonderful lens. I really do like that lens. Very sharp and compact. I was shooting at 1/50th of a shutter speed. I think 1/50th of a second, or was it 1/40th of a second? I maintain 1/50th just so that, you know, the minimum shutter speed rule, if your lens is 40mm, you have to shoot at 1/40th or faster. So I was shooting about 1/40th or 1/50th. And the ISO was somewhere around 800 or 1600, and I was shooting wide open at f2.8, right? Not a big problem. But the issue here was the f2.8 was not sufficient depth of field that I needed to get everything on the dish, on the bowl or the plate to be in focus. I want to see the entire plate in focus. I don't want to see that much area in blur. Right, so I stopped down to f5.6. It means that I need to ramp up my ISO to 1600 or beyond. It is still not sufficient depth of field. Then I need to ramp up the ISO to 3200 because I'm going to shoot at f8 or f9 just to get sufficient depth of field. Right, maintaining 1/40th of a shutter speed, 1/40th of a second at ISO 3200 at f9. That was not really ideal to get a good shot. And bear in mind that I was in a fine dining restaurant. I did not want to set up a tripod that will be looking so not classy. Now, looking at the alternatives, say that I have the same camera from Olympus 4/3 system in the same era. Say that I have the Olympus E510 paired with just a kit lens, 14-42 kit lens that comes with the camera, right? f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens. I can then stop down the aperture to f4 or f5. I can still get about, say, 1/30th or 40th of a shutter speed at maybe ISO 1600. Because the camera has built-in image stabilization, a very reliable one, I can further reduce my shutter speed to, say, 1/20th or 1/15th of a second. If I'm shooting at, say, a 20mm on Olympus, which is equivalent to 40mm coverage on the 40mm pancake lens on the 5D camera, say that I'm shooting at 20mm, I can slow down the shutter speed to 1/20th or 1/15th of a second, meaning that I can bring down the ISO from 1600 to ISO 800 or even lower, ISO 400 if I really want to stretch. the shutter speed. Yet I can still get sufficient depth of field because a small image sensor gives me twice the depth of field coverage than a full frame camera. Shooting at f4, maybe 1/15 of the shutter speed, and ISO 400 or 800 will definitely get me a much better result than a full frame camera, say the Canon, with an ISO 3200 with f9. And you know what's the final thing that really put the nail into the coffin? That 1/10 or 1/15 of a second shutter speed on the Olympus, I'm more confident in shooting that slow shutter speed because of the image stabilization than shooting about 1/40th of a shutter speed on the pancake lens in the full frame 5D camera. I'm more confident in hand holding and getting sharp images without any handshake because of the image stabilization. This simple comparison tells you that sometimes, in some situations, that depth of field, the more depth of field in the Olympus camera can come in handy. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which camera you use, whether you use a full frame, APS-C format, or the micro 4/3. Photography is a lot more than gear. It is about storytelling. It's about what you want to say with your photographs. If you already have a full frame camera, good for you. But if you're considering to buy a new camera, or if you're considering to upgrade your camera, and you think that micro 4/3 is inferior just because the image sensor is small, and you must get a full frame camera just because everyone else is telling you that full frame camera is superior, then I think that you need to rewatch this video. I think that micro 4/3 is more than sufficient to tackle even the most demanding photography situation today. But I know that a lot of people will disagree with me. I foresee a lot of arguments happening. Please leave them in the comments below. I want to hear from you as well. If you have enjoyed watching this video, if you found it useful, please give me a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to this channel. I will definitely make more videos coming this way. Until the next one, please do stay safe and take care. Bye bye.